the Indian Air Force owes its present professional status to the imagination, courage, and great loyalty of its pioneer band of Indian officers and men who were the salt of this earth. They had the guts and determination to touch the sky with glory. Some of them have gone down in history as legends of the Indian Air Force. This film is a tribute to these sons of the soil who had the will to do and the tenacity to overcome all odds and obstacles. They had the courage and conviction to cling to inexorable ideals in the interest of service and their country. Their deeds of gallantry and sacrifices have gone a long way to inspire the present generation and have also given support and credence to the high state of operational preparedness of the Indian Air Force. Future generations will learn from these stories that an Air Force such as ours is worth living for and worthy of any sacrifice, whatever it be. Jai Hind.
To depart in valor is the symbol of life. To be remembered with respect in itself is life. Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee, the first Indian Air Chief of the Indian Air Force, a towering legend whose saga of life was one of determination, dedication and total commitment to the service that he guided from its inception till its transformation to an efficient and capable air arm of independent India and one of the most powerful air forces in the world.
He struck me as a man who was humble, a man who was humane, a man who was friendly and had a sense of humor. We had in Mukerjee a man who led us very ably.
Very sincere, humble and dedicated man for the preservation and growth of the Air Force. I consider him as the main architect of the Indian Air Force, who not only laid the foundation of Indian Air Force but built it and expanded it from 10 to 45 squadrons after independence.
Jovial, genial, gentleman of the first order in uniform. He had no seniority complex. Such a wonderful man he was.
Born on the 5th of March 1911 to an illustrious and well-known family of Calcutta, his father, Shri S. C. Mukerjee, was in the Indian Civil Service. His nationalistic character and outspoken nature had a profound influence on Subroto. His mother, Shrimati Charulata Mukherjee, was an educationalist and a social worker. From his early days, Subroto had shown an aptitude for a military career, a trait which he owed much to the exploits of his uncle Indralal Roy, who had joined the Royal Flying Corps in the First World War and was known to have shot down 9 German aircraft in aerial combat and was the first Indian to be awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. In 1917, a tank came to Chinsura for publicity of the war effort, and 6-year-old Subroto Mukherjee got himself photographed with the tank. Subroto took his matriculation exam in 1927. After a year at the Presidency College, he went to England and joined Cambridge University. Subroto appeared for the Cranwell entrance examination in 1929 a career he had been longing for. At the age of 18, he was one of the 6 Indian boys selected to undergo 2 years of flying training at the Royal Air Force Training College, Cranwell. Subroto Mukherjee, H.C. Sarkar, A.B. Avan, Bhupender Singh, Amarjeet Singh, and J.N. Tandon were the 6 young men to embark for England from India in 1930 to lay the foundation of a new air force. In early 1931, Subroto started learning his aerobatics, and in December 1931, he did his first solo flying, which was full of excitement and thrills. The first batch of the Indian pilots was granted the King's Commission on the 8th of October 1932. This date today is regarded as the anniversary of the Indian Air Force. On the 1st of April 1933, A flight of No.1 Squadron Indian Air Force was formed at Drigg Road, Karachi, equipped with 4 Westland Wapiti aircraft. Subroto was amongst the 5 Indian pilots who made up the flight. A thorough gentleman with down-to-earth human qualities, Subroto was always very close to his colleagues and loved and respected by his subordinates. A man ideally suited to act as a buffer between the Royal Air Force and the young Indian flyers and men who were trying to prove their mettle in the Indian Air Force.
He avoided all conflicts and cultivated cordiality amongst all personnel.
Mukerjee could put you at ease whenever he met you, and there were no airs about him. He didn't give the impression that he was the boss or the headman, but that he was one of us.
In the autumn of 1936, a serious rebellion broke out in North Waziristan. The Wazirs of Tori Khel, led by the Fakir of Ipi, revolted against the government. This entailed large-scale operations by the Army and Air Force. The Indian Air Force moved into Waziristan towards the end of August 1937. At this time, A flight was commanded by Flight Lieutenant Haynes of the Royal Air Force, and the 4 Indian officers of the flight were Flying Officers Subroto Mukherjee, Avan, SP Engineer, and Narendra. During the 3 months that A flight remained at Miranshah, it put up an outstanding performance. It flew a total of 1,400 operational hours, keeping its aircraft's serviceability as 100%. Gradually, the Indian squadron was getting battle inoculated. Thereafter, the Indian Air Force grew at a slow but steady pace. By July 1939, all the 3 flights of No.1 Squadron had been established, and their flight commanders were Flying Officer Subroto Mukherjee, SP Engineer, and K.K. Majumdar. On the 3rd of September 1939, the day Great Britain declared war against the Axis powers, Squadron leader Subroto Mukherjee became the first Indian Air Force officer to be promoted to the rank of Squadron leader. He assumed the command of No.1 Squadron, the first Indianized squadron at Ambala.
It was not an easy task. The RAF personnel were reluctant to take orders from the Indian officers, and this created a lot of problems. But Subroto Mukherjee managed to handle them beautifully well.
During the Second World War, Subroto Mukherjee was the senior-most Indian officer of the Indian Air Force. For his participation in the Northwest Frontier Province operations, Subroto Mukherjee was mentioned in dispatches in 1942. Subroto got married to Sharda, a girl from well-known Pandit family of Bombay. Mrs. Sharda Mukherjee was an able partner and the epitome of a perfect helpmate who made a distinct contribution to the service life, setting an example to follow and a tradition to live up to. Subroto Mukherjee was promoted to the rank of Wing Commander and took over command of the Royal Air Force Station, Hawker Hart. He was the first Indian to command a Royal Air Force unit. The Indian Air Force Squadron received the trophy for the most accident-free squadron in India. In Hawker Hart, the Indians had a sense of belonging and self-respect, which was totally lacking in the other Royal Air Force stations commanded by Britishers. After the war, Subroto was promoted to the rank of Group Captain and appointed Director of Training in Air Headquarters. He started a separate Royal Indian Air Force Headquarters with the aim of gradually becoming independent of the British era. In the course of development and growth of the Indian Air Force, Subroto was a man with innumerable firsts to his credit. He was the first Indian Flight Commander, first Indian Squadron Commander, and later on the first Indian Station Commander, first Indian Commander-in-Chief, and the first Indian Chief of Air Staff. After long years of struggle, India became independent on the 15th of August 1947, a freedom that came at the cost of partition of the country into India and Pakistan. Along with the Army and Navy, the Air Force assets were also divided. The responsibility of reconstruction of the Indian Air Force fell on the shoulders of Subroto Mukherjee and a small band of young, brave, and dedicated officers who creditably filled the vacuum created by the departure of the British. From 1947 to 1954, as Deputy Chief of the Air Staff, Air Vice Marshal Subroto Mukherjee played a valuable role during the stormy days of independence, partition, and reconstruction. Shortly after independence, tribal mercenaries, clothed, fed, and armed by Pakistan, with Pakistan military commanders leading them, invaded Kashmir, and after occupying Uri and Baramulla, they came within striking distance of Srinagar. The Indian Air Force was faced with its first challenge. Subroto was a member of the Army Airlift Committee, which planned and executed the hazardous task of airlift of supplies, arms, ammunition, and troops for the defense of Jammu and Kashmir. On 8th December 1947, the 1st Dakota, carrying Air Vice Marshal S. Mukerjee and Air Commodore Meher Singh, Air Officer Commanding No. 1 Group, landed at Poonch to take assessment of the situation. The contribution of Air Vice Marshal Mukerjee and Air Commodore Meher Singh were legendary in the annals of the 1948 Kashmir operations. It goes to Subroto's credit that in all the decisions to be made, the interest of the service and the country were ever uppermost in his mind. When Governor General Lord Louis Mountbatten asked Air Vice Marshal Mukerjee, the senior-most Indian Air Force officer, as to how long British officers should remain with the Indian Air Force, Mukerjee replied, 5 to 7 years, a decision which delayed his own promotion by a good 7 years, showing how genuine in convictions and action were the thoughts and deeds of the man. Subroto played a very vital role in the years of expansion and consolidation of the Indian Air Force from 1952 onwards, first as Deputy Chief and later as Chief of the Air Staff. In December 1952, Air Vice Marshal Subroto Mukherjee was sent to England to undergo a course at Imperial Defence College, London, to further equip him to take over the top appointment. On his return to India, Subroto, the only surviving officer of the first batch commissioned in 1932, took over as the Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Air Force on 1st April 1954 in the rank of Air Marshal. On this very day, the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, presented new colours to the Indian Air Force at Palam. Mrs. Sharda Mukherjee recalls.
On this memorable day, while walking up to his flak car to take the salute at Palam as the first Indian Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, Subroto told me,
"Believe me, Sharda, I don't deserve all this at 43. It is all God's grace."
I think this was the finest prayer anyone could offer to his deity.
As I go down the memory lane, I see him as a squadron leader, wing commander, group captain of Air Marshal, and the same man inside uniform. There's not a single difference in his smiles with juniors or seniors all these 30 years.
He was approachable by everybody. Somebody is court-martialed and given heavy punishment. If he or his wife reached his house, maaf kar deta tha.
On assumption of this high office, Air Marshal Mukherjee brought with him the intimate understanding of the problems of the Indian Air Force with full import of his responsibility. Having been with the service since its inception in 1932 and having held all types of appointments from pilot officer to Air Marshal. On the 1st of April 1955, the title of Commander-in-Chief was dropped and it came to be known as Chief of Air Staff. Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee was fully equipped with abundant maturity and an incisive insight which he made full use of in the 6 years that he was the Air Chief. Remarkably even-tempered, he showed hardly any signs of stress even under the most trying circumstances. Perhaps the only sign of stress was his incessant smoking and stubbing out the cigarettes after a few puffs. He smiled spontaneously. With Subroto, by 1958-59, India and the Indian Air Force was well on its way to shake off dependence on foreign countries for combat aircraft, having undertaken the license to manufacture the Vampire aircraft, Nat aircraft, and the Orpheus engine. As far as the operational effectiveness of the Air Force was concerned, it was kept under constant review by Air Headquarters under Subroto Mukherjee. Subroto laid great stress on the welfare of men and their families. His genuine understanding of human nature, his love for his men, and his sympathetic approach to their problems endeared him to one and all. Gradually, he came to be known as a father figure in the Air Force.
He dedicated his life to improve the welfare of officers, senior NCOs, airmen, and civilians of the IAF.
You see, as airmen, we really loved and respected him. He was so kind and he was so willing to help us anytime we approached him for our problems.
In 1959, I went from there to Bombay for an operation, and I went in tetanus infection. And as soon as Subroto Mukherjee heard of this, he immediately rang up me, said, "What is the matter with your wife? What's happened to Satya?" And he came to see me there. And he was the chief of the Air Force at that time.
Subroto was deeply concerned about his officers and men. Every time one of his men was killed in a crash, Subroto felt as if he had lost a part of himself.
In fact, the day that he was going to attend the parade, 1st April 1954, and the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was going. As we were about to leave, he said, "It's a sad day for me. So many of them are not here."
Subroto Mukherjee was averse to finding fault with his subordinates just for the sake of it. He did not believe much in overly formal inspections. He preferred to conduct those in an informal manner with a view to helping the unit rather than finding faults in its functioning. His positive approach invariably helped create an atmosphere of pleasant and relaxed efficiency.
Marshal Mukherjee was a very kind man. He loved children and children loved him. They say if a person whom children love and the intellectuals respect, he is an angel. And Marshal Mukherjee was an angel.
In November 1960, Air India inaugurated its service to Tokyo by approving flight. Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee and Air Commodore P.C. Lal, later Air Chief Marshal, went on this flight for an official visit to Japan. Late in the evening on November the 8th, Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee rang up his old friend Rear Admiral Dayashankar, who was on delegation in Tokyo. Subroto was keen to spend the evening with his friend instead of joining the evening tour planned by Air India.
While the dinner was being prepared, my father went to Air Marshal Mukherjee's hotel. He picked him up. They drove around for a little while, chatting as old friends do. And then they came back to the Hotel Kyo-Ino. They had given a special suite for this dinner. They had decorated that suite very well. The choicest of foods was laid out. Very senior staff was serving these two gentlemen. And among the items was a beautifully decorated fish. So Air Marshal and my father began eating the fish. And during the course of eating, most unfortunately, a bone got stuck in Air Marshal's throat. When they realized what had happened, a maid took him to the bathroom to try and get the bone removed, to try and get him to eject the bone. But she was not successful. So she brought him back into the room. And my father tried to undo his buttons and his collar and his tie. Air Marshal could not speak at all.
The medical team arrived soon and tried artificial respiration, but to no avail. It was all over. Sadly, Subroto Mukherjee had passed away. On the 9th of November 1960, Air Marshal Mukherjee's body was carried through the streets of Tokyo by special Japanese funeral cortege, duly escorted to the airport and brought to India by a special Air India plane.
Convention in the Air Force that when chief leaves the country, goes somewhere, we must go and see him off. That is all the principal staff officers. Myself and Pinto, we are both playing golf in Delhi Golf Club with Mukerjee. He said, no, I'll carry on, you don't have to come, this is a private visit. This is the first time we didn't see him off, and we missed him after that.
On the 10th of November 1960, he was cremated with full military honors. A grateful service paid its tribute in the form of a flypast of 49 aircraft, one for each of his 49 years. The honors and mourning were not merely a matter of protocol and form. They were conducted amongst genuine tears and sorrow in the memory of the foremost pioneer of military aviation in India. He was loved and admired by all. The mentor of the Indian Air Force, Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee, had passed into history, but left behind an indelible imprint in the annals of the service. A man to be emulated and remembered with respect and reverence.